Welcome to the Firehouse Roundtable podcast, brought to you by the Ventura Fire Foundation. My name's Peter McKenzie. I'm one of the hosts. I'm a retired fire captain with the City of Ventura Fire Department.
And I'm Jason Kay. I'm an active fire captain also with the Ventura Fire Department.
And we are excited that you are going to spend some time with us at the kitchen table, learning about firehouse issues that we're trying to bring awareness to.
Thanks for joining us as we discuss the issues of being a firefighter, both on and off duty, and how it affects us.
Let's get right to it. All right, welcome to another episode of the Firehouse Roundtable. I'm one of your hosts, Peter McKenzie, and I'm here with Jason Kay. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm good, Peter. I've been looking forward to this episode a while. Dr. Sharma is coming on today, and he was introduced to our fire department a few years ago. And I know that he's volunteered to do a bunch of stuff for us. He came to the last award ceremony at the foundation ball, and the more we ask him to do, the more he just steps up. So I've been excited for this one to come.
Yeah, we're lucky to have him as a resource. I'm going to hit him up. I know that I'm going to hit him up about sleep because I remember sitting in one of his trainings and he talked, not the whole time, but a significant portion of time was on sleep. And I know for me personally, it's an issue. So I'm going to try to see what tips and tricks I can extract from him. And I know that a lot of the guys have like serious sleep trouble as well. So yeah, I'm excited about our conversation. Glad that he is volunteering his time to come chat with us.
Let's have therapy for free on Dr. Sharma. Let's do it.
You know, firefighters love free things. All right, let's get into the show. Dr. Sharma, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited about having you come on. I think Jason and I are both pretty familiar with who you are, but for the sake of our listeners, why don't you take a second and just give us a quick bio for, a little bit about yourself and what your expertise is in and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my name is Ryan Sharma. I'm a psychologist here in Ventura County. My full-time work is as a director of clinical training and associate professor at California Lutheran University. I've been teaching here for almost 12 years now, teach a number of different courses in behavioral therapy and treatments for anxiety disorders. Those are my clinical specialties. For the past about 6 or 7 years, I've been contracted with the Oxnard Fire Department to provide direct services for them. So I also have a private practice here in town. It's very small because my full-time work here takes up quite a bit of time. But I've been working with firefighters and other first responders for quite a while now, and have really kind of gotten to know the Oxnard Fire Department really well. I've done some informal work as well with Ventura City Fire Department, helping them out with a couple of projects and doing some informal consulting. So I'm just kind of happy to be around and sort of like, help, provide the best of what psychology can for, the betterment of firefighters.
Why don't you go into how did you bridge the gap from being in your professional world to your interactions with the fire service? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting. I think probably back around 2013 or 2014, we actually got a visit from several firefighters here in the community. It was at that time, Chief Hamilton was a battalion chief. And he came along with several other firefighters and basically came and said, we're having a problem in fire service. We have more line of duty deaths than we have more suicides than we have line of duty deaths. And he was really looking to kind of build out some networking with other psychologists and health professionals to see what they could do as far as getting more services for firefighters. So to be completely honest, fire service kind of found me. I never really set out to work with first responders. It kind of found me. And as I was learning, kind of like going to some of their meetings, I went as a community resource when they do their Safe Talk trainings for suicide awareness and intervention. I started going to some of the peer support summits, so just kind of listening to the stories that firefighters were telling. And as I was doing that, I realized that there was just a whole other world that I didn't know about. And to be completely honest, I also heard a lot of other stories about how firefighters were going to clinicians and they left the first appointment feeling more hopeless than when they had started. And I realized that psychology as a field was really not meeting these needs well, that we were falling short. And so kind of like, as I've been learning more and more about like how we as a profession needed to do better, I kind of have taken it as my mission to help improve the training that we do for students and other clinicians so that we can better serve firefighters and their families.
Yeah, that's awesome. this is a relatively new thing in the fire service anyway, as far as having clinicians who are culturally competent, I believe is the word they use. In looking at your bio, it looks like you have some expertise in OCD, panic disorder, PTSD. So I'm wondering if that's probably along the lines why Chief Hamilton sought you out, but what was different about your therapy or your treatment for people who need your services, a regular person versus a firefighter? Like, obviously, if you have expertise in PTSD, I think that's a lot of, there's a big component in the fire service related to that. Other than like figuring out how to navigate the fire service, is the therapy pretty much the same or similar for the trauma that a fireman suffers versus, say, trauma that a civilian suffers?
I would say overall it's the same, but the flavor may be a little different. So, for example, there may be some specific factors that are relevant to firefighters that may not necessarily be relevant for other people who experience trauma. And it just has to do with the work environment and the nature of the work itself. I'll give you an example. I mean, several times I'll hear firefighters tell stories about, really gnarly calls that they go on, and that it may include, like quite a bit of dismemberment or just sort of like a lot going on. And it may not necessarily even be the blood and guts, that is traumatic to them. Like it may be a wailing mother, or it may be a hysterical father, or it may be sort of like, other aspects of the situation that they feel ill-equipped to handle. It could be the case that some of their equipment doesn't work the way that they want it to, and they feel like they may have let the family or the victims down. So like there's some of these unique factors that are, very specific to the work of being a firefighter that you wouldn't necessarily see in other aspects of treating trauma in the general population.
That hits home with me a little bit. I know that the ones that are left alive affects me personally more than the actual gruesomeness of the call. One of the things that you said a second ago that I want to hit on again is firefighters would go to their first session and they'd leave more hopeless than when they got there. Can you tell me what regular therapy does for, say, the general population, and then why that same therapy would leave a firefighter feeling more hopeless?
Yeah, there's a number of things I think that come up, and some things that clinicians really need to be aware of. For any client who comes to counseling, like it's really important that they feel understood. It's really important that the clinician really take the time to sit down and really understand their world from their perspective, because if they're not doing that, they're not going to be able to empathize effectively. It's not about assigning any blame or trying to find fault in the client, right? You really want to understand their world so that you can kind of see it from their eyes and kind of help them through it. And so as an example of some things that clinicians may sort of miss when working with firefighters, for example, like let's say perhaps like subtly or implicitly judging the use of humor. I know like firefighters often use gallows humor to kind of cope with the difficulties of the job, and that's a pretty natural and normal thing to do. Clinicians may not necessarily understand that. And if they don't understand that and they judge the client, they're not going to feel safe in opening up to the clinician. Clinicians need to understand the nature of the work schedule itself. I mean, the schedule itself can provide a considerable amount of stress on a family, considering that, you could be on a 72 or a 120, or you could get, assigned to a strike team and be out for a long period of time. And like that poses a lot of challenges. And number one, like being able to co-parent, it poses a lot of challenges in sort of like missing important milestones or, family events or holidays. The transitioning between work and home is also a challenge. Like if clinicians don't understand, like, that you're going from like a very high paced, intense environment to one where you're back with your family and you're going to want to, plan the next birthday party, that takes some adjustment. And so I think clinicians are kind of missing some of these unique challenges here. And if they're missing them and they're not sort of communicating to the client that, hey, I recognize these as parts of the stressors that you're having to deal with, then clients aren't going to feel understood. And that's why they may end up leaving. Some of these clinicians feel like they're not being understood, and no one is there to really help them.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And that also makes sense. It seems like a little bit like this is a passion project for you, that you came to the fire service. And now I think the gist I get from you is that you really enjoy this side of the job. And I think it kind of makes your brain turn on a little bit from what I've seen. And I know you've come and offered to have dinner with the guys at the fire stations, and we've all taken you up on that. That's been cool. And I know you've also actually read some of the IFSTA manuals and the books to kind of get the terminology down and what we're when somebody comes into your office and we say vernacular from the fire service, we look at you and you go, oh yeah, I got that one. We're good. So I think that's really cool. And I can see that you really enjoy this part of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's some aspects of, right, that's kind of goes back to the culture piece. It's like, I know how important meals are. I know how important the kitchen table is. I know that I'm not going to sit at the kitchen table until I'm invited to. One last thing is, I hear a lot too, like in all of my readings, and like I really try to do a lot to really understand fire service from a number of different perspectives. And one thing that comes up over and over again is that firefighters invariably say that, being a firefighter is the best job in the world. As difficult as it is and as challenging as it can be, they all say that it's the best occupation. And I always rebut that. And I say, well, actually, to be honest with you, caring for firefighters is the best job in the world.
What was something about the culture when you were on your journey to learn, how this world works that you didn't expect, or that the average listener would never assume? Or give us some things about it when you did your research and were trying to figure out how this fire service works that you kind of threw you a curveball.
Yeah, I think there's probably two that come to mind, if that's all right. One is that the job changes the way you see the world. That's kind of come up over and over again. Like I hear lots of stories about how, like, you don't look at the beach the same way when you're a firefighter and you've had to do like ocean rescue, or you don't look at a house the same way. Like a historic house looks like it's a pile of tinder, versus just being an interesting looking house. So there's aspects of sort of like because being a firefighter is so unlike other professions, that it necessarily shapes how you see the world. And I think that's also true for law enforcement. The second thing is that I don't think you can underestimate the role of trust in fire service. I think that, one of probably my most humbling lesson was knowing that I can't really kind of come in to this culture and talk like I know what's best for everyone. I don't think that works well. And I think a lot of clinicians fall into that trap. They fall into the trap of thinking that they've got all of the book knowledge about mental health and behavioral treatments for, certain disorders. They just assume that they can go and start applying it to everyone. And we have to remember that fire service has been around longer than psychology has. And so a lot of what I had to do, or that I was sort of very sensitive to, was that I cannot assume that I'm going to have anyone's trust. If they come into my office, even if a firefighter was referred to me by another firefighter, I cannot just assume that I'm going to have their trust. I know that means something very specific in fire service, likely solidified by the fact that you're all in harrowing situations routinely where you're counting on each other to keep each other safe. And there's a bond that creates that can't be replicated. So I also know that, if I screw up, like I also risk kind of like, sacrificing the trust that I've built over time. And so like, there's a responsibility and a loyalty that I've learned to develop over time that is sort of very sacred in this work.
Yeah, that's interesting. That last answer wasn't what I expected you to say, but very true. I mean, it's true. Like it's definitely like I don't want to say like a club, but I mean, non-firefighters don't understand what some of these things are that we do. And it's hard to explain those things as well, because there's so much wrapped up into it. It's a feeling, it's a situation. It's not really describable sometimes, but yeah, interesting. Question for you. And it kind of leads right into what you were saying. What are the things that you are seeing in the firefighters that you work with and the interactions that you have that kind of are blind spots? Like, what can firefighters do to, combat some of the things that cause PTSD? I mean, what are you seeing that if you could wave your magic wand and, and all of a sudden all firefighters did X, Y, Z, that, 50% of these issues would go away? Like, what are the things you see in your professional world? Obviously not specifics with names and dates and things, but just in general terms.
Sure. Gosh, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about any type of anxiety disorder, and PTSD was historically classified as an anxiety disorder, and recently it's kind of been set aside because it's got some unique features, but it does follow the same kind of pattern. And what we know about anxiety disorders is that they're perpetuated and maintained by avoidance. And so, I mean, typically, like if you think about, how we typically understand PTSD, is that there's a memory that may be very anxiety provoking. It could be a memory of a past call. It could be a memory of a situation, or it could be a collection of memories. And sometimes what happens is that our brains begin to interpret those memories as dangerous, even though memories in and of themselves are are not dangerous. They can be unpleasant, or they may be accompanied by unpleasant sensations, but the memories are not dangerous. And so what happens is that people who develop sort of like longer term problems with PTSD will begin to like avoid anything that's associated with the memory, because it's interpreted as something that they don't want to get close to. So as an example, not wanting to talk about it, avoiding places that remind them of the memory, avoiding reading materials or anything else that reminds them of the memory, or wanting to sort of like, avoid through alcohol or other substances. And usually what happens is that it sort of perpetuates the belief that the memory itself is dangerous. And so one of the things that I really want firefighters to understand is that, you don't have to avoid. And as unpleasant as it can be, like, we have methods and strategies to kind of help with those memories. And the basic strategy is that, we're not going to be able to erase the memory. You can't make the memory itself go away, but you can take the wind out of the sails. You can make it so the memory exists without necessarily having the strong emotional reaction or the strong physiological reaction to the memory. And it just happens to be through approach versus avoidance. So we kind of approach the memory in a safe place where you can kind of see it for what it is. And like over time, like the memory's still going to be there, yeah, but it's not going to have the same kind of punch that it did before. And so I think, overall, I think, kind of like having an approach attitude can be helpful in, kind of dealing with some of these issues.
What do you do to take the wind out of the sails of some of those memories? Like, what are the strategies? Like, how does that work? What does that look like?
Broadly speaking, it really looks like kind of moving towards instead of moving away. And what that could mean is doing things like writing or journaling about the memories or about events, talking about it with the clinician, closing your eyes and kind of reimagining being there so you can kind of see it for what it is. And what you're doing as you approach is that you realize that it's no longer dangerous, because like maybe you're going to get an emotional reaction there in the session or there in the activity, whatever you're doing. But the reaction itself is just a reaction. It's not necessarily indicating any type of oncoming danger. And I do have to say, this is one thing that I really like about working with firefighters. I mean, aside from the fact that they have great sense of humor, that's always kind of fun to do. Like, I always like to use humor in my sessions, and just because I'm a doctor doesn't mean I'm not a pretty normal person, I think. But the other thing is that firefighters already have skills in being able to activate behavior even while they're feeling intense sensations. It's invariable. Like, I can ask any firefighter who's had to go up onto a roof and cut a hole above a structure fire. What do? Do you sit at the bottom of the ladder and you wait until you're feeling calm before you go up? No, they don't. I mean, it's going to be terrifying probably the first couple of times, but they're going to go up even while they're feeling terrified. So like they already have this inherent skill in doing things very directly and very solution focused. And that actually can work really well in therapy, because there may be opportunities to challenge firefighters in some of these assumptions. And usually when I do, they're all ready to go at it head on, which is kind of fun.
That's funny you bring that up, because that plays back into trust, right? So like if firefighters are great at getting things done. Like, you give a group of firefighters an objective, like, hey, you need to take that wall down. It needs to be gone. They're going to do it. Like, no questions asked. It's going to happen. But it's the same applies. And I've experienced this in my personal life, is if I am in either employing someone or paying, someone, a professional or something, and I trust that person that they know something more than I know, and I'm trying to, learn from whatever they have. If I trust them and they show me the way, like, done deal. I'll put my head down. I'll do it. Whether it's like the gym, fitness, nutrition, a doctor telling you to get your blood pressure, whatever it is, like, we take action, which I think is an attribute that is pretty universal in the fire service. Like, once we know the program and we know the plan, like, that's it. We're headed that direction. And so I want to go back to one thing you said before, and then I'm going to stop talking and let Jason talk. But the last couple of years of my career, I worked at Station 4, which is out on the east end of Ventura, and I live in the same sector. And I thought that was great because I was close to home. If I needed to swing by the house, not a big deal. If the family wanted to come over, everything was great. Now that I've been gone for a year and a half, going on 2 years, I don't think that was such a good thing for me, because literally when I drive to work now, I literally take the same road every time. And there's 2 calls that I drive by every single day, twice a day. And they don't, I mean, it is what it is, and I don't think about it every time I drive by, but they're definitely there and they are clear as day. And I got to thinking, like, maybe there is something to be not living in the area where you work. Cause, Jason lives out in the Santa Clarita area. He doesn't have those, I don't think anyway, those connections to all the street corners and the houses and driving by all these terrible things. But the guys who live in town, they absolutely do. And sometimes I think it's a privilege to have that separation, because it definitely comes up. And I think from the data, this stuff gets worse over time, especially after guys retire and whatnot. But definitely resonated with me when you were talking about locations and associations with memories.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pete. It's funny. I was in Ventura with my family when we drive through to go either to a function for the city or if we're going to dinner or something out there. And I'll talk about how we get places by calls that have come up. And the longer I've been in Ventura, it's like I could talk about almost any street in Ventura and a call we've been on that's horrible or even not a big call, but that's how we know where we are and where we're headed. And we'll get somewhere and I'll look at my wife and they'll be like, she's been quiet for a while now because she's just hearing me talk about terrible things for the last 10 minutes. She's like, I think we're good. We don't need to keep going over all this stuff. So yeah, I agree with you. It's funny.
Yeah, there's a topography of the city that is sort of just inherent in your work, especially when you've been in a sector for so long, that you just kind of get to know every nook and cranny of it. And it's true. Like I hear it from firefighters at Oxnard. It's like many of them will say, when I retire, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time in Oxnard. Or I'm going to try not to go to Oxnard as much, because you're right. It's just going to be riddled, or there's going to be so many associations there. I've heard it the other way though too. I've heard other firefighters who've left Oxnard and gone to the fire departments in their home communities, and sometimes for the sense of wanting to be to helping your own community, kind of being there for your neighbors. And I think there's sort of like that, again, like that spirit of helping and like of being of service that's so strong with firefighters. That can also pull people to want to be live closer to where they work.
And one of the things we talked about in one of the previous shows was when your family needs you when you're at work, and there's a big call going on that you have to be at, and you can't help your own family, and your wife's calling you for some assistance, big or small, and you just can't be there for that. So there's definitely some value for working in close to your house and knowing what's going on there too. I want to ask you about some. As somebody who's in the station with other firefighters and as a captain especially, I would love to have some things that you could recommend that we look out for each other. So when it comes to high stress levels, when it comes to problems at home, when it comes to suicide awareness, all that stuff, I'd love to hear maybe some symptoms that we can look out for and then recommend our peer support team. And then I know they usually are just going to recommend going to a professional like yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to share some things. And I don't want this to sound like it's authoritative or like I've got the answers. But there are a couple of things that sometimes stand out to me. Let me back up for a second and just say that when I first meet with a firefighter and we're kind of going through like a history, I'm trying to get an idea of where their stress is. I usually think of the stress that a firefighter has kind of like falling into three broad categories. And this is mostly work-related stress. I'm not talking about any family or external issues, but for work, I'm usually thinking in three categories. One is administrative difficulties. Like these are like the rules and regulations you have to follow, like, the battalion chief's way of doing things, and just like policies and procedures, and just like the natural stress that sometimes comes along with having to follow rules that don't make a lot of sense. The second one is the aspects of the job itself. It could be like the calls that you go on, the frequency of the calls, the lack of resources, the lack of functioning equipment, those kinds of things. The third category is the sort of intra-departmental dynamics that happen between firefighters and like in the work environment. So like I know that it can be very, depending on the size of your department, it could feel very cliquish. There could be sort of coalitions, or maybe certain in-groups and out-groups. There may be sort of, between shift fighting that happens. It kind of like adds another level of stress. And sometimes I think about that type of stress as an avoidable stress. The job itself is already hard enough. Like there's probably some aspects of like kind of like working together as sort of like part of the same department that could probably be just make life easier for a lot of people. Now, I say that, of course, not having the work, because I also know that you have to live with each other. And so, like, you can't erase that fact. There's just going to be things that get on your nerves, just like, within your own families, like that just happens too. It doesn't mean that you love each other any less, but it's going to bubble up to the surface. So I say that recognizing that dynamic. But I'm also like wondering, like, what may be some ways to just kind of increase morale, broadly speaking, by simply addressing some of the relationship issues and basic relationship skills to maybe resolve some of those difficulties. And that's a big ask, because it comes with a lot of different layers. And I know that there's a lot of other factors that are involved in that. So, but that's something that I've always just kind of found interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. That's one of the reasons that we try to have events and get people there. And whether it's just, we have one coming up to go to Made West, just come hang out with the guys for a night. That's always a good team building type thing.
Inevitably, a lot of firefighters are type A personalities, and then you put them in a living environment with confined walls of the fire station, and then make them work hard and don't let them sleep and don't let them eat. Like, it's inevitable. Like, there's going to be issues for sure, but definitely, I mean, obviously, if we could all get along better and address the things that are easily solvable, right? Like getting along with each other or understanding somebody else's perspective, that seems like a no-brainer for sure.
Hey, this is Joe Booth from the Ventura Fire Foundation. To learn more about the foundation and our programs, visit our website at www.venturafirefoundation.org. 100% of our funding comes from generous donors. And if you like what we're doing, I encourage you to become a donor. It's very easy. Just go to our website, again, that's venturafirefoundation.org, and click the red donate button at the top. Whether it's $5 or $5,000, every donation helps ensure local firefighters thrive.
I kind of want to switch gears on you a little bit. I remember sitting in a class you put on at the Ventura Fire Department, and we talked about sleep quite a bit. And that is something that I know a lot of firefighters struggle with, myself included. I mean, I still have sleep issues. How does sleep factor into mental health? And like, what are some things that the guys can do to solve some of those issues or make them better?
That's a great question. I absolutely agree. I think sleep is pretty cornerstone to a lot of just what we do. I mean, you're not going to be able to function effectively in your life, whether you're at work or at home, if you're not firing on all cylinders. And sleep is just so essential to like our restoration during the night and kind of like, cleaning out some of the chemicals in our brains so we can kind of feel refreshed. It's a real issue. To date, I think there's two broad approaches to how we understand sleep and how we would help people with sleeping problems. One of the approaches works, very well, but is not well suited to firefighter schedules for the simple fact that part of the treatment is kind of training good sleep behaviors. And you can't do that if you're required to wake up every hour and a half to put out a fire at the river bottom. One area of research that has a lot of really good support for doing better with sleep is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And it includes several different parts. And there's some of those components that actually could be useful for firefighters. And some of them don't fit very well just like I mentioned, because of the nature of the work. The parts that would be useful are called sleep hygiene. And sleep hygiene just have to do with like really good habits around preparing for good restful sleep. These include things like not drinking coffee past a certain time of day, maybe cutting down on naps, especially if you're having a hard time falling asleep, then you probably shouldn't be taking naps during the day. Keeping a consistent wake time, like if there's one thing that you could do, if there's only one strategy that you could do, the one that's actually most effective is keeping a regular waking time, regardless of whether or not you're working and regardless of how much sleep you actually got the night before. So if you have 6 a.m. as the time that you wake up, then you always get up at 6 a.m. And that's more important, believe it or not, than like the going to bed time is the waking time. And part of the reason is because you build sleep capacity throughout the day. And if you're keeping a consistent waking time, then you're also making consistent your sleep capacity buildup throughout the day. Apart from that, the other approach that actually could work pretty well for firefighters And you'll have to excuse me for being a little geeky here for a minute. But one of the well-established evidence-based treatments that we have in psychology is built on an acceptance model. And what that means is that sometimes we think about our emotions or our thoughts as the problem. Like sometimes we say, oh, I'm feeling this way. Like I shouldn't be feeling this way. I need to be feeling better. And so sometimes there's like this conflict that we have with ourselves based on how we feel. And we usually see that as sort of like a secondary level of suffering. And it's like when we're not accepting like how we're feeling, then we have like this another layer of suffering. And this relates back to the sleep approach, because sometimes people with insomnia get really frustrated with having insomnia. So they're going to be awake at the night, and then they're just laying in bed and they're just angry about the fact that they're awake. And what that usually does is it just prolongs how awake they are and how little sleep they're going to get, because it's very difficult to sleep when you're that angry. And so what I mean by the acceptance-based approach with insomnia is imagine what it might be like if you just accepted insomnia as a factor of your life. And if you accepted it and you actually relaxed and just said, okay, this is how it is, and this is what I'm going to deal with, it actually makes it easier to fall asleep or to kind of find restful moments to rejuvenate. Even if it's not on a regular sleep schedule, at least you don't have that added burden of feeling like you have to be sleeping, because that's often counterproductive. And so I don't know if I answered your question well, and I know I got a little nerdy there for a second, but it kind of has to do with like our approach to like how we feel about the actual symptom.
That's the first time I've heard that, the latter, about accepting it and just kind of being okay with it. And then that might in itself help. I could see it. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I know for me, it's been a long road just after I left the fire department to kind of normalize my sleep again. And the problem with working at the fire department is exactly what you said. Like, try a morning routine, try an evening routine, try any of the tricks that traditionally are out there to improve sleep. It's impossible. Nowhere in any of the literature do they say, shine a bright red light in your face and jump out of bed immediately. Like, that doesn't work, right? And that's what was so incredibly difficult when I was at the fire department, is getting into those routines. The second I left, I was like, all right, I'm doing all the routines I can ever imagine. And I went too far the other way, and then kind of failed and trying to bite off too much. But it's slowly getting better. But
you just slept all day?
Yeah, I wish. It's slowly getting better, but it's definitely a work in progress. I had just a regular checkup with my doctor, and I go, hey, I said the same, trouble sleeping, all this. And they go, well, how long did you have sleep trouble? And I go, over 25, the whole time I was in EMS. And she's like, how long have you been gone? And I go, about a year. And she's like, good luck with that. They say, I don't know if she was speaking with authority, but she's like, it takes probably about half the time that you had the problem for it to resolve itself. And I was like, oh, great. So I'll be dead by the time I fix this. But anyway.
That sounds about right. Yeah. Talking about getting back in some kind of regular habit too, I noticed that the days off are so important in between shifts, because you can build up some kind of regularity of sleep. And it's funny to hear guys who say in order to get rested and feel good again, sometimes it takes a full 7 days off. After, a 72, that's really tough, or even a 96. They say your regular 4-day, you never really even get back into the routine of feeling good again and like you're rested, and they need a week. Do you have any idea, statistic wise, at how many days it takes or how many hours it takes to get back to normal, or is it never back to normal?
Oh, great question. I wish I knew like what the standard was and whether or not that actually differs with firefighters. I'm not familiar with that research, but I think it would be really fascinating. But what you say is actually pretty consistent with what I also hear from other firefighters. A lot of firefighters will say, it takes me at least 1 day, 2 days, sometimes 3 days to feel like I'm back in this groove. And usually by that time, they have to go back to shift. The schedule itself just adds this layer of stress that requires an adaptation that's not required for people in other professions.
Yeah, one of the things I've said on the show in the past is I've decided to not make any important decisions on my first day off, because it never is a good decision that I end up making on the first day off. And my family knows also, the first day off, sometimes have tiptoes around dad. That's just the way it goes. And I need to keep myself in check at the same time. One of the things I deal with personally, and it seems exacerbated at work too, is I'll feel like I'm doing okay. And then when I go to bed, and this is not a firefighter specific thing, all my thoughts turn on. right? I hear that all the time. Specifically with firefighting, I will have a list of things that are undone. And then as soon as I lay down, those just are a recording in my head of, you should probably just do this. You should probably get up and do that. And, I kind of have to train myself to turn all those thoughts off. Do you have anything specific when it comes to that? I'm sure you've heard that stuff in the past.
Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of consistent with the acceptance-based model that I was talking about a little bit ago, on the one hand, like our minds are like that. Our minds are like these noise machines. It's like constant noise machine that's always on and it's always feeding us material. And sometimes, people get frustrated with their minds for doing what minds do. Same kind of thing with insomnia. They get frustrated with, the fact that they're having these thoughts. And I get that they're uncomfortable and it's irritating because you're trying to get to sleep. But, one strategy, there's a term that we have, which is called cognitive diffusion. And cognitive diffusion is kind of like looking at thoughts for what they are instead of what they represent. And we can kind of just see thoughts as thoughts and kind of detach from them and just allow them to be there, right? Again, accepting, which means kind of like, not feeling compelled to have to push against them. And if you don't have to push against them, then now you're freer to kind of, direct your attention to where you want it to go. And so like in some of those, and I know that's kind of like when I say that, it sounds like, easier said than done. And it's absolutely true. It's easier said than done because it requires practice. But that is the essential skill. It's like, the fact that you're having those thoughts in and of themselves may not necessarily be the problem. Problem may be that we're spending a lot of time trying not to have the thoughts. And if you've ever tried to, control your mind by like not thinking about chocolate cake, for example, you know how that's going to go.
Yeah, I feel like most things in therapy are easier said than done. They take a lot of practice. If you had a matrix, be able to just plug it into our heads, that'd be perfect.
Yeah. In our world at the Ventura Fire Foundation, we constantly have to evaluate, what do our resources allow us to do in the terms of charitable work for the community that we serve, which obviously is firefighters and their families. It would be awesome if we had, multi-million-dollar budgets and could do whatever the heck we wanted to help, but that's clearly not the case. So sometimes we struggle with directing our funds to like the highest and best use for what we're trying to do. And that is easier said than done, similar to what we were talking about before. But in your experience and in your interaction with firefighters and their families and your knowledge of the mental health issues and, treatments and all the things that you do in our world, what are like some areas that are maybe underserved that need some awareness and or resources thrown at them to make a difference? Like I know that's a hard question, I assume, but what are you seeing out there that could help organizations like ours get clarity on how to be better at what we do?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question, and I think it's an important question to ask and to think about and consider. Now, of course, like I'm not as familiar or knowledgeable about like all of the different factors and domains within fire service that need funding. But like within mental health, like if you're asking about kind of like if I could sort of, plan kind of like a targeted intervention that's related to firefighter behavioral health that may have strong dividends. I think it does. And hopefully I'm not just answering this way because I'm biased, but I think it does have to do with kind of access to early intervention. Because I think a lot of the issues that I end up dealing with, they're not serious issues, but they are often issues that develop into serious issues if sort of left unattended. And I think, we kind of have a problem with our healthcare system right now. Mental health care is not easy to access. Using insurance is not easy. And if you do, you're not likely going to get to a clinician who may understand fire service. The whole purpose why I'm doing this work. There's very easy things that therapy can help with. And sometimes people ask me, like, do you feel like everyone needs therapy? And I say, no, I don't think everyone needs therapy. But I do believe everyone can benefit from therapy. And it doesn't have to be anything major. It doesn't have to be anything sort of life-shaking. Even if there's like aspects of relationships that you want to work with, like if you can get those evened out, relationships are a protective factor against a lot of mental health issues, including suicide. And it's like, if you have strong relationships around you, like that's a protective factor that can help carry you through a lot of very stressful times. And so sometimes it's just a matter of, kind of like doing a size up, right? I like using that metaphor of doing a size up of your life every once in a while and sit with a clinician and just kind of take a look, like, how am I doing with my spirituality or my religion? How am I doing with my relationships? How am I doing with my health routine? and my physical health? How am I doing with, my job and my occupation, and how am I doing in my romantic relationships? And so sometimes I think, having another person to kind of talk through and just help do that assessment can really go a long way. And it doesn't have to be long or extended. It's just something that you can kind of make sort of a maintenance issue.
So it's more preventative maintenance, catch problems early, and then how would you logistically, if you could orchestrate that, what does that look like?
There are a number of departments that are making behavioral health checkups mandatory, or at least part of like what they offer. And it's like a once a year meeting, right? And I've developed one for Oxnard Fire. We haven't launched it, but purely for logistical reasons. But essentially it would be, they could take a lot of different forms. So maybe it's like taking a couple of questionnaires or a couple of screening instruments, having a half-hour meeting with a clinician, just kind of like talk about how things are going on, and just kind of get a reading on like how you're doing and if there's any areas that you want to work on. And it could be as simple as that. You go every year and you get a physical and you get your cholesterol taken, right? Every year. It's like useful to kind of track that over time. Like, gosh, my cholesterol has been going up, routinely. Like maybe it's time to do something about that. You can get the same kind of data from a mental health clinician.
So is the once a month thing kind of a self-evaluation, or is that something that you're planning on going over after you get that back from them?
Once a year. So it could be like an annual type checkup. It could be at the discretion of the firefighter if they want to continue or if they want to work on anything. And then we have services that are available to do so, but it's never forced on anyone. The checkup is just kind of like an opportunity to kind of, get a third person's perspective on things. And if it's something that you really wanted to, we could have something to provide for you. But by no means would I ever make counseling or therapy mandatory, because it doesn't have to be counseling or therapy. Like maybe, increasing your participation at church is something that would be really helpful for you. Maybe it's a weekend retreat with your partner. Like that could also be, completely acceptable. Everyone's going to have their own way. It doesn't have to be this way. I think the function though of the meeting would be just kind of open up that conversation and have the opportunity to kind of do that evaluation. But it would include, to answer your question, Captain K, it would include a type of sort of self-evaluation and self-assessment.
I actually like that. So, that is something that's attainable, that, we could potentially facilitate. Like it's not that cost prohibitive. Especially if you come into some sort of contractual relationship with someone like yourself or something along those lines. But that's actually good. It's like, hey, just open the conversation up and normalize it and make it okay. And no different than, a medical doctor appointment. So I like that.
Speaking of Oxnard Fire, what is it that as a contracted physician with them or psychologist, what is it that you provide for them?
So there's kind of two branches of my contract. One is to support the peer support team. And really, they're the front line. I really like the peer support model as it's developed within fire service. I think it's a great model. Oxnard Fire does not prefer the critical incident debriefing model. The peer support model works really well, and I think it's really great. And so really, my relationship with them is just an extension of the peer support. So they're kind of the front line. If there's, issues going on, or if they see firefighters, around them that they think might be struggling, they'll check in. It's confidential. There's, recent laws that have kind of protected the role of peer support individuals within these departments. So they're the front line. And then if for whatever reason, there may be an issue with a firefighter that's kind of beyond their competence or beyond their scope, or like maybe it's just like a little bit sort of like more than what they know what to do with, they can refer them to me. And I'm contracted to provide direct therapy services to the sworn personnel as well as the office personnel.
And do you have financial contracts with them as well, or does the individual pay, or how's that work?
So my arrangement actually with Oxnard is that the city of Oxnard pays me. So I'm directly contracted with the city of Oxnard. But I'm very pleased that Chief Hamilton was very deliberate when he set up the contract. He wanted to make sure that in order for this service to be used, he wanted the firefighters to be able to trust it. And so the contract makes it very clear that neither the city nor the department have any access to my records. Everything is billed anonymously, and there's no sort of connection at all to like their work performance, or I don't do any type of evaluation for the city. This is all just to support them and their own well-being and to get them to be the best firefighters possible.
That's really neat. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I think Yeah, most of the time they're worried, is this going to be a work comp case against me? Am I going to get fired because I'm whatever these issues are? So that's pretty insightful. Yeah. I like Chief Hamilton. He's good at what he does. We got to get him on the podcast because he I think has a lot to contribute, and in our area has contributed a ton to this whole conversation. So
yeah, he's really on the leading edge of this stuff too. I think you presented up north at a firefighter event. Is that true? Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chief Hamilton put together a panel on behavioral health in fire departments for the subset of the League of Cities, which I guess would be the California Fire Chiefs Association.
Mm-hmm.
So like we presented Dr. Oden, who is a psychologist with the First Responder Wellness Center down in Orange County. And then there was also, I'm blanking on his name. I should have had it in front of me. Kevin was his first name. But he was also presented on some of the statewide initiatives that they're trying to roll out in supporting firefighters and behavioral health across the state with, I think, through Cal Fire. But in any case, it was a nice opportunity to kind of talk about, like, if you want to kind of build in behavioral health services, there's a couple of different models to use. One model is to kind of have your dedicated clinician. And so that's what I was speaking about. So my contribution was kind of talking about, what's it like to have a clinician that's kind of like just knows your department. And I think there's some benefits to that. I mean, like I'm on the workforce emails for Oxnard. So like I know when the engineer rank is getting pinched for mandates. I know when there's major incidents. I know when there's just kind of like, dynamics or changes within the department. Like it gives me some situational awareness. The other benefit of just kind of being dedicated to a department is that I can show up to the stations, and I think the firefighters can kind of just get to know me just in a more informal manner. So like if for whatever reason, like a peer support personnel wants to refer someone to come talk to me for some other issues, like they don't have to think about, some weirdo off in some office somewhere. They're like, oh, if I have a problem, I can go see that guy. Right. Like I've met him before. And so like there's some ways that I think that also kind of helps break down some of the stigma and the barriers for firefighters actually seeking treatment.
Yeah, you're building that trust up again, right? Like you talked about earlier. Absolutely. So if you can answer this, what percentage would you say use your services that you offer of firefighters?
Yeah, I actually can, because I calculate that somewhat routinely, but I haven't recently. The last time that I calculated the percentage of the Oxnard Fire Department that has come to see me, it's roughly around 20%. So about 1 in 5. And not necessarily, for long periods of time. Sometimes firefighters just want to come and they want to check in. They just want to say hi, or they just want to like a little to chat about some things that are going on. So, I mean, just the nature of my relationship with the Oxnard Fire Department doesn't mean that I have to kind of take on clients for long periods of time. Like I'm just around and they can kind of check in and check out as they need to.
Is that just any issue that they have, or do you try to tailor it specifically towards work, PTSD issues like that? Or if it's a relational issue or a home issue, you tackle all that stuff with them?
Absolutely. Anything that may be affecting them, anything that I may have some contribution for or expertise in. I don't pose that I have like the answers to everything or that I'm necessarily helpful for everything, but I'm certainly open to hearing whatever that they need. And if there's something that they need that I can't provide, I'm always happy to get them connected somewhere.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Sharma, it's been great having you on. If there's any firefighters listening that would like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. I mean, feel free to shoot me an email or a text. I'm happy to always consult. So like even if something that you just wanted to talk through or just get an opinion on, I'm always happy to just set up a phone conversation and talk about that. And I don't charge for those. Those are pro bono. My biggest mission is just to make sure that people get the help that they need. So if I can get them connected somewhere, if I can provide some referrals or even just some assurance that they're okay or that they're going to be okay, I'm happy to do that.
Well, we'll make sure we put your contact info or the contact info you want to put out in the show notes so that we'll make it as easy as we can. I know some of the struggle sometimes for our guys is when they finally raise their hand and go, okay, I need some help here. Then it starts this whole other bureaucratic red tape nonsense that a lot of them just, I've heard it over and over again. They go, forget it. It's too hard. It's just forget it. Like I'm trying to get help, not create more problems for myself. But so the easier, I think that the more we reduce friction when it comes to reaching out for help, the better. And that's one of the things that the foundation is trying to improve, which it's not an easy thing to just wave your wand and fix. But I love the fact that you said you're happy to have a conversation pro bono and just help navigate some of that stuff, because it is intimidating for sure for people.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. It was a great conversation. I applaud the efforts you're making in our industry. The fire service is definitely unique. We need more people like you, but we are definitely lucky to have you in our area. But so thanks for coming on. Jason, any last words? Or?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sharma. Like Peter said, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate that you're putting yourself out there and not only wanting to help people where they're at, but even spending some time researching on how to help firefighters specifically. I know that's needed. You came to the last foundation ball. That was really cool. Hopefully you'll be to the next one in a few months. We're going to have another one. So hopefully we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. It was a great conversation. And of course, thank you for what you do. I think, my job's relatively easy compared to yours.
Well, that was awesome. That was even more in depth than I thought it would be. Some of Dr. Sharma's takeaways. I got a bunch of notes I wrote down from some of the stuff that he said that I've never thought about before. Relationships are a protective factor for mental health. That was cool. And that was one that I wrote down. And then the fact that he respects the fire service enough to say, I know I'm not in there automatically. I have to build that trust with the guys, and how trust is important to him. And then another one, the fire service has been around longer than the practice of psychology. Yeah, it was it was a great session with him. It was fun.
I think when you talk about a relationship being a protective, what did he call it? A protective influence? Is that what he said?
Factor for mental health.
I could also argue that the opposite is true, right? So like a bad relationship is a contributing factor to poor mental health.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
The one thing that stood out, which I was really pleased with, was when we asked him the question, like, okay, help us out. What can our foundation do to make a difference? And I liked his answer. I mean, it was simple. It was like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, duh. Like, have an annual mental health checkup with a professional and see how you're doing. And if you're doing great, great. If you need help, let's get you some help. But I think that alone would make a huge difference, because if you're already sitting in front of the clinician, and maybe you've been wanting to, but you never did, or the stigma attached or whatever, but let's just say you're there and you're like, well, I'm already here and I have this issue that I've been worried about. Let's talk about it. And then my guess is your access to resources is going to be a lot easier once you're already sitting in front of the expert who knows what the heck they're doing, right? So I thought that was actually a really good idea. Like, that's something that we could definitely look into from as far as foundation perspective, providing something along those lines. So I thought that was good.
Very doable. It wasn't an insurmountable thing, just an annual checkup. I thought that was cool.
Well, cool. Jason, again, thanks for spending the time with me to have this conversation, and hopefully our listeners got something out of it.
Yeah, have a good week.
All right, you too.